His finger rested on the trigger. One squeeze. That's all it would take. The American bomber hung in the sky like a wounded bird, bleeding fuel and trailing smoke. Inside, 10 men fought for their lives. Outside, a German fighter ace prepared to finish them. It was December 1943, and mercy was about to change everything. This is the story of two enemies who became brothers. Franz Stigler could see everything through the holes in the B-17's fuselage. Wounded men, dying men, blood frozen in icicles over silent machine guns. He was one kill away from Germany's highest honor. One trigger pull from legend. Instead, he made a choice that could get him executed. He chose humanity over duty. He chose to save them. The American pilot, Charlie Brown, watched the German fighter pull alongside his crippled bomber. He waited for death. Instead, he got an escort to safety. Then, for 43 years, he carried one question. Who was he? The German pilot who looked him in the eyes and chose mercy instead of murder. The man who risked his life to save strangers. In 1986, Charlie Brown began searching. For years of dead ends. Hundreds of letters. Countless phone calls. Then in January 1990, a letter arrived from Canada. For words that changed everything. I was the one. December 20th, 1943. The old pub limped into RAF seething with 11 wounded men aboard, including one dead. The B-17 was so shattered it never flew again. Ground crews stood in disbelief. They couldn't comprehend how it had stayed airborne. At debriefing, Charlie told his commanding officers the truth. A German fighter had escorted them to safety instead of shooting them down. The response was immediate and absolute. Never speak of this again. Don't tell the crew. Don't tell other pilots. Don't tell anyone. If word spread that German pilots could show mercy, it might create dangerous sentiment among the troops. The official line was carved in stone. You can't be human and fly in a German cockpit. Charlie stayed silent. He completed his combat tour, flew more missions, came home to West Virginia. He went to college, rejoined the Air Force in 1949, and served until 1965. He became a State Department Foreign Service officer, made trips to Laos and Vietnam. He retired in 1972 and moved to Miami, working as an inventor. He built a life. He raised a family. But he never forgot. His daughter would later recall the nightmares. She remembers her father waking in cold sweats, gasping for air. The war never truly left him. And always, underneath the PTSD and the memories of combat, was one haunting image. The German pilot in the Bf-109, flying wing to wing with their dying bomber. Franz Stigler also stayed silent. He'd landed near Bremen after escorting the B-17 to safety and said nothing to his commanding officers. What he'd done was a court-martial offense in Nazi Germany. The penalty for sparing enemy aircraft in combat was execution by firing squad. If anyone discovered he deliberately let 10 Americans escape, he would die. So Franz kept the secret through the rest of the war. He survived Germany's collapse, the chaos of defeat, the occupation. In 1953, he immigrated to Canada, married, and became a successful businessman. He too built a new life. He too tried to move on. But the memory of that December day in 1943 stayed with him. The B-17 with the massive holes in its fuselage. The wounded crew fighting to survive. The young pilot who looked back at him through the cockpit window. Franz would later say he lost his appetite for victory claims after that day. He stopped aggressively pursuing kills. The sight of that shattered bomber and its dying crew changed something fundamental in him. Both men carried the memory in silence for decades. An encounter that lasted maybe 10 minutes had marked them both permanently. Boston. A combat pilot reunion called Gathering of the Eagles. By now, Charlie Brown is 64 years old, a retired Air Force colonel living in Miami. Boeing has invited old fighter pilots to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the B-17's first flight in 1935. During the event, someone asks Charlie if he had any memorable missions during World War II. He thinks for a moment. Then he tells the story. The crippled bomber. The German fighter that appeared on their wing. The escort to safety. The salute. Afterward, People gather around him with questions flooding in. How had he never tried to find this pilot? Who was he? Did he survive the war? Charlie realizes he's carried this question for 43 years without ever seriously trying to answer it. He decides, I need to find him. He starts with official channels. He contacts the U.S. Air Force. He writes to West German Air Force archives. He requests records from the Army Air Force's historical office. Surely someone, somewhere has documentation of German pilots stationed near Bremen in December 1943. Months pass. Then a year. Then 2 years. 3. 4. The records don't exist, or they're incomplete, or they've been lost, or they're classified. Dead end after dead end. The German military archives were scattered across divided Germany. The Luftwaffe's detailed records were destroyed or captured by the Soviets. Finding one specific pilot from one specific day in 1943 is nearly impossible. But Charlie can't let it go. His nightmares continue. He wakes in cold sweats, remembering the flak, the fighters, the dying crew. And always the question, who was the German pilot? In 1989, Charlie tries a different approach. He writes a detailed account of the incident and sends it to a newsletter for combat pilots, both American and German veterans. The letter describes everything: the date, the location, the circumstances, the Bf-109's markings, everything he remembers. He includes one specific detail. The German pilot had looked directly at him and then given a salute before breaking away. Charlie sends the letter and waits. He's 67 years old now. More than 46 years have passed since that day over Germany. The German pilot might be dead, might never have survived the war, might have died in the decades since. But Charlie has to try. Meanwhile, in Vancouver, Canada, Franz Stigler is 74 years old. He too had attended Boeing's 50th anniversary event in 1986, the only German pilot there. A local TV station interviewed him and he told his story. The B-17 he spared, the decision he made, the risk he took. Franz had also been making quiet inquiries over the years. He wanted to know if the bomber made it back, if the crew survived. He contacted old Luftwaffe associations, asked around at veteran gatherings. No answers. Then in January 1990, Franz sees Charlie's letter in the Combat Pilot newsletter. He reads it. The date matches. The location matches. The circumstances match. After 47 years, Franz knows the B-17 crew survived. They made it home. Franz sits down and writes a letter. He sends it to Charlie Brown in Miami, Florida. January 18, 1990. Charlie receives an envelope from Canada. Inside is a letter that begins with 4 words that answer 47 years of questions. I was the one. When Charlie and Franz first spoke on the phone, Franz described his aircraft. Every detail Charlie needed to confirm this was the German pilot from December 20, 1943. Franz explained that when he pulled alongside the old pub and saw the extent of the damage, when he looked through the holes in the fuselage and saw the desperate crew trying to save each other, he remembered the words of his commanding officer, Gustav Rodel. If I ever see or hear of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself. To Franz, the men in that shattered bomber were no different than men hanging from parachutes. They were helpless. They weren't a threat. Finishing them would be murder, not combat. Franz told Charlie he tried to get them to land in Germany or divert to neutral Sweden, where they'd receive medical treatment. But the Americans kept flying toward England. So Franz escorted them through German flak positions to protect them. As they talked, something shifted in both men. Charlie's nightmares began to ease. The question that had haunted him for nearly 5 decades finally had an answer. More than an answer. It had a name, a voice, a real human being on the other end of the line. For Franz, hearing Charlie's voice meant everything. For 47 years, he'd wondered if his choice mattered. If the bomber crashed into the North Sea. If the crew bled out before reaching England. Now he knew they lived. All 10 men survived that mission. The 2 arranged to meet in person. 6 months later, they met in Seattle. A camera captured the moment. Franz stepped out of a car, saw Charlie, and ran to embrace him. The 2 men, once enemies, held each other and wept. Franz turned to the camera and said softly, "I love you, Charlie." They spent the day talking, filling in the missing years. Charlie introduced Franz to other members of his crew, men who were alive because of Franz's choice. That December day, Franz met their children, their grandchildren, families that existed because one pilot chose mercy. The meeting proved to be profoundly healing for both men. Charlie said his nightmares stopped after finding Franz. Franz said that meeting Charlie and the crew was the only good thing that came out of World War II for him. He'd lost his brother in the war. He'd seen the Luftwaffe lose over 90% of its pilots. He'd witnessed the destruction of Germany. But this, saving these men, this was something he could be proud of. After 1990, Charlie and Franz became inseparable friends. They spoke on the phone every week. They traveled across the United States together, appearing at air shows and veteran gatherings, telling their story to civic groups and organizations. In one later visit, Franz gave Charlie a book. Inside he'd written, "In 1940, I lost my only brother as a night fighter. Thanks, Charlie. Your brother, Franz." The two families became close. Charlie's wife and Franz's wife became friends. The bond extended beyond the two pilots to everyone around them. Some people didn't understand. Franz received calls from Germany calling him a traitor for sparing American bombers. Some Canadian neighbors shunned him, calling him a Nazi. Franz's response was always the same. They would never understand. For Franz and Charlie, the labels didn't matter. German or American, enemy or friend. Those were just words from a war that ended decades ago. What mattered was what happened on December 20th, 1943, when one man looked at another and chose humanity over duty. The friendship lasted 18 years. On March 22, 2008, Franz Stigler died in Vancouver, Canada. He was 92 years old. 8 months later, on November 24, 2008, Charlie Brown died in Miami, Florida. He was 86. They're buried thousands of miles apart, but their story remains inseparable. Two men who met for 10 minutes in combat in 1943 and became brothers for the last 18 years of their lives. Their story became a book called A Higher Call, written with the help of authors who documented every detail. The book became a bestseller, introducing their story to millions who'd never heard it. But the real legacy isn't the book or the fame or the recognition that came late in their lives. The real legacy is what Franz Stigler taught, that even in war, humanity can prevail, that you can wear an enemy uniform and still see the human beings on the other side. 47 years to find each other. 18 years together. Both died within 8 months, as if neither could exist long without the other. That's not just a war story. That's a story about what it means to be human.